This is pre-reading for Suetonius Claudius, the scholar. You know, we look at the title here and it just says Claudius, but actually in Suetonius's work it is Divinus Claudius, the divine Claudius. That may or may not be an inside joke. We know that Seneca, the philosopher, who lived through Claudius's principate, wrote a book called the Apocolocyntosis, which made fun of the whole idea of Claudius being divine. Anyway, the short sections that we have before us highlight the aspect for which Claudius is perhaps best known, besides his invasion of Britain in 43 and his defeat of the Celtic tribeswoman Boudica. He was known as a scholar, and here we have some insight from Suetonius as to Claudius's scholarly activities. Now, there's a few jabs here and there, but by and large, he's actually kind of complimentary towards Claudius. All right? Now, we've seen this again and again and again. With Suetonius, he starts out with an accusative. Okay, so this is not your subject. Okay, where is your subject? Well, right here in this passive verb, right? And what did he scribere? Well, there we go, historiam. When did he do this? Then. And then we have a double ablative absolute here, right? Come on now, let's get the tenses of these participles right. Okay, the clues are all right there, right? Okay, so it's pretty straightforward as he writes his first effort at being an author. All right, now the cum here in the next phrase I would take as temporal, and here is its object. Now, frequenti auditorio, don't say auditorium. I suppose you could say to a packed auditorium, but really the emphasis is on a crowd of listeners. They weren't in a building called the auditorium. That's my point. Okay? And here he has a comment on how Claudius did successfully or not successfully did his first public reading. So this was always a big social event whenever an author would write something. Take Virgil, for example. He did not write the Aeneid in one sitting. He wrote little sections, but he would kind of test drive them and have these he'd have a wealthy sponsor open his lavish house with a big hall where a lot of people could hear. And then you'd often have a professional reader, usually a trained Greek slave. A professional reader read what he had written. So that's what this is about here. Juvenal, in his very first satire, written about this same time as Suetonius, he just complains how boring and tedious these public readings are, and we're supposed to act flattered or like we're flattering them for their great achievement, when he says most of it is just garbage. Well, here we have an insight into what happened with Claudius. Now, this participle I specifically want to mention. Okay? Refrigeratus, and you're going to say chilled. Of course it means that, to cool down, to chill, but here, one of the other definitions they give you in your dictionary is to interrupt frequently. Okay? And he was interrupted frequently a semet ipso. Okay? Semet is just an intensifier, really a ipso. Okay? And so the result was that he perleget agre. That's an adverb, agre, tells you how he did it. And here's the reason why this first reading also went bad. Okay, another cum temporal clause. Okay, and here is my subjunctive verb. All right. Initio recitationis. Here, defractis cum pluribus subsellis, and here would be the agent. And this particular genitive here, cuiestam, the laughing of whom, okay, the laughing of whom, that's really my subject of extortus esset, all right? Now, ne, we're so used to seeing as a negative purpose clause, but your text points out that here we don't take it that way at all, all right? But really it's ne quidam, not even, okay? So it's not a purpose clause, because as we look down onto the next page, we don't see a subjunctive anywhere, okay? So as we go on to the next page here, let me get centered here. There we go. I also want to point out this word queen, which you haven't run across a whole lot. It's a general negative, and there really isn't a translation. It often is found with verbs of some kind of resistance, like he's trying to stop himself from laughing here. So that makes sense that that it fits in here. Okay. Re voco here, you know, it does recall, but the idea is you bring it up again. Okay. And this you should take as a genitive with this verb. Verbs of memory often have a genitive object or a genitive adjective because you are mindful of, or in this case, reminiscent of the deed. Okay? So he can't stop laughing about what this guy did. That's the point. And so the public reading kind of went bad. All right? That was when he was a private citizen. But now in principatu also scripsit plurimum et recitavit. So even after he became emperor, he scripsit and recitavit. And this is what I was talking about before, per lectorum, a professional trained reader. Now, in the next sentence, this is all pretty straightforward as it kind of describes his literary activities. Here's my main verb, however, sumsit, post caedem Caesaris dictoris, that all goes together, but also transiit. Okay, now in the sense of that, transeo just means to go across, but here we're talking about history. And the history is ad inferiora tempora quaepit, and then he went concerning superioribus. Okay? So he's talking about earlier times and then later times. Okay? Apaca civile, this would be from the end of the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. Okay? Now we have another cum. We have another cum clause plus subjunctive. All right. Now make sure that you handle this gerund correctly. It's in the genitive case. Okay, but it is potestatem relictam tradendi. Okay, and what are we going to tradendi? Well, de superioribus. All right. Now, there's a reason why he wrote the material he did. Okay, and part of the reason is, notice the ending on this participle, it's nominative masculine singular, so who does it refer to? All right, and it's passive, right? It's PPP, okay? So the long and short of it is he wanted to write histories about the Julio-Claudian family, but he was corruptus saepe a matre et ab avia. They didn't want certain things being told. They have an image to protect. But we can see Claudius, who was often mistreated by his own family, we can see him just saying, nuts to it all. Now, here we have a genitive chunk. Here we have a nominative. Posterioris, right? These are the later times. And he left unum et quadraginta reliquit. Now, here are the names also of some other books that he wrote. All right, I'm going to switch here. So he composuit. And this is the name of the book. De Vita Sua, and this is how much it took up. And here's a comment on its quality. Whenever we have magis quam, we have a comparison. So more inepte than in elegantur. Okay? Likewise, he wrote Ciceronis Defensionem Adversus Asini Galli Librus. All right, that's kind of the title of the second book. And here is a favorable comment. He says, satis eruditam. Now, this is really interesting. Commentos est. This is a deponent verb. So he created novas litteras tres. So if you look in your book, in the notes section on page 62, there you can see the novas litteras tres. And this is just kind of fascinating that he felt that there were certain sounds in the alphabet that were missing, and he wanted to add them. All right, and numero veterum, you'll have to watch what case that is. Added it. Okay, now, yes. Okay, and then as we go on, what he says here, de quarum ratione, the reason for these things. Cum privatus, now that means as a private citizen before he became, and then we have this in contrast with princeps, okay? But it didn't gain traction, this idea that we should add 3 letters. It didn't gain traction cum privatus, but mox princeps non difficulter obtinuit, with the result that in uso alquoque promiscuo esset. Now, promiscuous, we use that in a negative way, right? We use that in a negative way, that, we talk about people being promiscuous, but what that means is in common or everyday use or public. All right, and that's the sense of it here, publicly or commonly. So apparently he made the people use these letters, and it kind of caught on. Now, scriptura here, like sola scriptura, is just generic writing. These letters, extat, talis scriptura, such writings exist in pleris libris et diurnis and titulus operum. All right, so diurnis is like the twice a day records of the public acts of the Senate or whatever. We might call it the daily minutes. Okay, and he's just saying, Suetonius is saying that You can find these weird letters that he forced on everybody in some places. They are still extant. That is, you can still find examples of them. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of pre-reading for the first part of Claudius, here, the scholar. Hope it goes well. Pretty straightforward, just chunk like I did and use your head. Don't just say, I don't get it, but figure it out. Why is it the way it is? What goes with what? Match up your endings. Okay, voila.